Hello friends, today your friend Juggler is going to telling you about, what if Naruto was died and the darkness reborn, part 1. Check the creator from the link given in the description, and if you enjoy this video then please like, share and subscribe my channel. Let's start the story. Naruto had arrived at the village after he had successfully beaten Sasuke, who had defected in a vain attempt to gain more power which was promised to him by Orochimaru. The fight had been long and hard on him since Sasuke had been trained while his own training had been nearly non-existent, since so many in the village hated him for the biju sealed up in his body, so he was very proud of himself for completing his second A rank mission. But as soon as he had stepped through the gates of the village of Konoha, Sasuke was plucked from his grasp without warning or any form of thank you, and Tsunade herself gave the blonde boy a solid chop to the back of the neck. The only words Naruto could get out before he succumbed to the blackness were "Why?" Naruto woke up hearing fuzzy voices like you would hear from a radio with very terrible reception, and supremely light-sensitive eyes that made him squint in pain for a minute to reacclimatize. Soon enough though, everything came into full focus and he saw that he was simply sitting in a chair in the center of the Konoha Council Hall, and as he sat there he heard so much yelling was going on around him. Straight out execution is far too merciful to this stupid little shit. He almost ended the Uchiha line. The little fucker needs to die a slow agonizing death. Why waste time trying to torture the bastard when he can spend all of eternity burning in the pits of the deepest parts of hell, so there really is no need to delay him to his long overdue death. Those were but of a few of the things that he heard from the council members surrounding him along with the clan heads, and no matter which side he listened to boded well for the blonde hero. Everyone quieted down though when the doors leading into the room swung open to reveal a stone-faced Tsunade and Jiraiya. They both took their respective seats at the front of the table and everyone faced Naruto seated in the middle. Tsunade stood up to signify that she was speaking and read off the only thing on the agenda for the meeting: the execution of Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto will now be decided. Naruto's eyes bugged out of his head at hearing both his name combined with the Yondame's and that he was facing execution. He didn't know which surprised him more right now: the fact that he was related to the man in some way, or the fact that he had done something to warrant execution in the first place. What had he done? He had no idea what it was he had done, no matter how hard he thought about it, so he voiced his concerns. "Bah-chan, what the hell is going on? I haven't done anything wrong here." In record time, Tsunade's face went from emotionless to one of cold fury etched across her face, and she hissed out, "You will hold your tongue. Address me in such a manner again and I will shatter your jaw for your disrespect." Naruto winced at the anger in her voice, but what is this all about? He still couldn't figure out what was going on. "Fine, Hokage-sama, what is this all about? The blonde can control himself when he needs to, and a threat of a shattered jaw is a good reason for some self-control." Naruto winced at the level of anger in her voice, but what is this was all about? He still couldn't figure out what was going on. "Fine, Hokage-sama, what is this all about? The blonde could control himself when he needed to, and a threat of a shattered jaw was a good reason for some self-control." Most of the anger had left the features of the Godame and she then returned back to being emotionless. "You have been deemed expendable and you are to be trialed and executed for the crimes of your biju." Our blonde hero's jaw dropped to the ground as he heard her say that. "But Bah-chan, I'm not the Kyubi. Ask my friends, I haven't done anything wrong to deserve death." The council erupted into laughter as they heard him say this, yet stopped when Tsunade spoke up between the throes of laughter. "I haven't laughed that hard in years, so I will forgive your insult, but I would never be the grandmother to a demon such as yourself. And you have no friends. It was all a lie to secure your undying loyalty to Konoha, but now your uselessness has come to an end, so we can drop the act entirely. Your execution will correlate with the return of the Yondaime as he retakes the mantle of Hokage. But actually I will let him explain the plan himself." With those words being said, a bright yellow flash happened that revealed Minato the Yondaime Hokage standing next to his wife Kushina and children. Menma, who looked identical to Naruto except for the Kyubi Jinchuriki markers on his cheeks that looked like whiskers, and a slightly younger girl named Naruko. She had shoulder-length hair, red like her mother, and a soft-featured face. Many whispers and hushed gasps floated amongst the room as people stared upon a supposedly long-dead figure and his family. Greetings, Honorable Council. It is true that I am Minato Namikaze, the Yondaime Hokage. I had faked my death along with my wife and son to move into exile as to not trigger the legendary rage of Kyubi. With the Kyubi sealed within Naruto for a few years, it enabled the Jinchuriki seal to link my former son and Biju together on a spiritual level, and only when they were finally fully combined could I return to finally slay the Biju once and for all. With all the pieces finally coming into place in his head, his name being read as Namikaze and the Yondaime himself saying he was his former son, Naruto surged from his seat with a scream intent on causing some sort of bodily harm to repay his father for leaving him stuck with Kyubi, but he didn't get more than 2 steps before green light shot from the Shodaime's necklace and bound his arms, legs and head from moving. Minato chuckled at seeing Naruto lying on the floor struggling against the chakra bonds. I am glad that necklace even after all this time still keeps demon chakra contained. Your execution will be long and arduous. I will personally see to it myself. I have waited 15 years in exile waiting for the time where I can return to my people, and tomorrow I shall enjoy finally ridding the world of Kyubi once and for all. And with that he walked up to Naruto as he had maneuvered into a kneeling position. Minato knelt to be eye level with Naruto and said, enjoy your last hours on earth, Kyubi, and if my son is able to hear me, I would like to humbly thank you and apologize for what I will do. But why the hell am I even saying this in the first place, since my first son died when I started the fusion with the demon when he was a baby? Minato stood straight after that and grabbed the back of Naruto's head and brought the younger blonde's face to his quickly moving knee, and a resounding crack from the sudden breaking of a nose was heard by all in the room. And then the grinding noise as he ground his knee into the shattered bone and cartilage. Blood quickly escaped from the broken skin and poured down Naruto's face. He didn't make a sound through the entire ordeal, since he was resolved to not let them see the pain he felt on the inside. The powerful blow had caused his brain to bruise and swell, forcing him into unconsciousness. The next day in Konoha, the streets were flooded with people, both shinobi as well as civilian, as an announcement called for the attendance of the village inhabitants in the open marketplace. Everyone was waiting for what the Hokage had gathered them there for in the first place. Soon enough an Umbu walked into the square, and with a quick cry of Mokyutan, a large stage and gallows was erected in front of all of them, and the Hokage marched onto the stage to address the people. Gazing over the crowd, Tsunade picked up each face and smiled once she saw the entire populace of the village had showed up, bar the ninja on missions and villagers out on business. She addressed the gathered people of Konoha. Today I stand before you as your Hokage, but without you all there would be no Konoha. Together we are unstoppable. 15 years ago the Kyubi attacked our home and we would not yield to its demonic power. We brought the demon to its knees so that one day it would suffer as we did all those years ago and end its life so that it will never cause harm again. Today we see the final step in the death of Kyubi and raise ourselves above all others, superior to all. During her speech there were chants of praise and loyalty. Konoha, the crowd screamed, getting worked into a frenzy. Each ninja that fell to the beast will never die, they are not dead, they live in us, they live in Konoha. Roars of cheers so deafening thinking was made all but impossible with the intrusion of the cheering. Bring out the demon, Tsunade demanded. Naruto was bound with his hands behind his back and the Shodaime's necklace secured tightly to his neck to prevent any resistance of any kind. He was pelted with food, trash, rocks, as well as anything that the crowd could get a hold of. He made it to the stage and was knelt on the edge before the crowd. Naruto watched the crowd as everybody he knew screamed with chants of Konoha and murderer. Were some of the loudest out there. Tsunade stepped next to Naruto, which brought the crowd to a dull roar as she continued her speech. People of Konoha. Here is the Kyubi fused with a human into a solid form. Today we shall carve out our revenge for each man and woman torn from us. Today we finally send it into the depths of the abyss to suffer in an eternity of pain. The Umbu lead Naruto over to the rope hanging from the gallows and secured it around his neck fairly tight. With a signal the rope was pulled from the other end and Naruto was yanked into the air and lowered back into a standing position and was jerked back into the air and held for half a minute. Seconds from passing out, they lowered him and undid the noose. Naruto was then dragged to a table near the edge for the crowd to get a good view. His hands were freed and retied above his head. The lack of oxygen and disorientation proved to weaken him, so he put up little effort. Next a kunai was heated blazing red and agonizingly slowly cut through the skin of his abdomen, cauterizing each blood-carrying vessel to prevent him from bleeding out. During this process the amassed crowd was deathly silent, wanting to hear the pleas from the demon, for it to beg for his life, only to be denied his screams since Naruto remained deathly silent the entire time. Alas, they would wait an eternity since not a sound escaped the lips of Naruto except the sparse groan when the kunai hit a nerve cluster. After the cutting of his abdomen was complete, the executioners slowly removed each organ and loose flesh from the open body cavity. The same red-hot kunai was used to prolong his pain and stave of the loss of blood as each organ was cut out. Finally, once his stomach area was emptied of all organs, they sprinkled a mixture of salt and sulfur to draw out the screams they craved for. Again not a sound was heard, only blood past his drenched red lips. Infuriated Tsunade stepped forth to introduce the final player in this sick display of savagery. I bring forth the long-thought dead, the defeater of Kyubi himself. The yondaime, and a bright yellow flash erupted next to her, and none other than the yondaime himself stood with his arms to the sky, and the crowd immediately grew into cheers and praise to the once thought-fallen Hokage. Minato stepped next to the bloody table and the masses quieted as he spoke. The Kyubi so long ago stomped upon our noble people and watched the life leave their eyes, and now I shall watch the life leave its eyes. With that the Umbu picked up the almost comatose Naruto and knelt him at the feet of the Namikaze. Minato brought one of his famous tri-pronged kunai from his hip pouch and set it to the throat of Naruto. With a quick slash a torrent of rich crimson liquid sprayed out of the wound. Naruto quickly toppled onto his back, gasping for air that couldn't pass the blood since it was too thick to pass through. With his last few moments of life our bloodied blonde hero watched the glee in Minato's eyes grow as said man stomped on his chest, forcing even more of the life liquid to spray onto the stage for all to see. Soon the streams of blood slowed and lessened in strength before nothing came from the slice except drops, and with the stopping of the flow of blood so did the life of one Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto, vessel and tide spirit of the Kyubi. Unknown realm. Naruto woke up with a startle as he instinctively grabbed his neck since he had just had it slit by his father not that long ago. Yet to his shock, he noticed that the wounds he suffered were gone, and yet he felt strange in a way that he was unsure of. It was then that he noticed that he was glowing with a slight red energy and his nails were now sharp claws. He felt so much stronger than he had been while alive and he was unsure as to why. It then dawned on him what his father had said about the seal on him merging his soul with the Kyubi so that he could be killed. So it seemed that he had succeeded in his endeavors and merged them together. As he sat there in a realm that was void of anything as far as the eye could see, his anger grew as he remembered every second of pain that had ever been inflicted upon his person throughout his entire life. Tears began to fall from his eyes as he remembered all the pain he had suffered to try and make the people see him as a human instead of as a monster that they had said he was. In that moment he felt the last of his tears fall from his eyes as the rage within him grew. He pounded the ground as he screamed in rage and swore at the top of his lungs that he would find a way to gain his revenge, but not only towards his old village, no, his old prison, since one's village was one's home, and a home was where you felt safe. And the Leaf Village did not feel safe to him in any sense of the word. He would hunt down anyone who thought like his old prison and make them suffer as they had probably made others suffer. As his rage grew, his power rose higher as it did. Such a hard life you have lived, said a voice behind him. Naruto looked to see who else was here with him in this strange place, since there was nothing there before when he had looked. He saw a bright light that forced him to shield his eyes for a bit since it was so bright, but it eventually passed to the point that he saw a woman there of immense beauty that was beyond explanation or words. "Who are you?" growled Naruto as he was still in such a sour mood from the events he was forced to suffer through, "and what is this place?" "This is the land known as Purgatory," said the woman as she landed on the ground. As she did, the ground lit up as she walked towards him and held his chin with her hands so that she could peer into his eyes. Naruto was unable to look away for both the reasons that she wouldn't let him, and even if he could move his head she was too beautiful to look away from. "And it is the place where the most important of souls pass through so as to be judged by me personally." "And who are you?" asked Naruto. "I am known as Kami," said the woman as she let go of his face and stepped away from him. "So do I finally get some peace that I deserve and get to ascend to the heavens above," sighed Naruto, since if this was Kami, she would be able to see into his heart and mind and see that he was innocent of all that his abusers had said he was guilty of. "I wish it was that simple," said Kami with a heavy heart. "What do you mean?" said Naruto as he did not like where this conversation was going. "While it is true that your soul is deserving of the heavens," said Kami as she circled around him with her hands behind her back, "I am afraid that you can't enter it." "Why?" growled Naruto, since he would not be denied what was rightfully his since he was innocent. "Because of the seal you had placed on you by your father, your soul has merged with the demon that once resided within you. Because of that reason you cannot ascend into the heavens, and I have no choice but to send you into the depths of hell to suffer for the sins of the Kyubi. So I must suffer from the actions of my father not only in life but in death as well," shouted Naruto, who was furious about what she had said. He was innocent and she was going to send him to hell anyways. "I am afraid so." "And who are you to sentence me as such?" "Hold your tongue, you insolent brat," said Kami as the ground around her began to crack as she got angry, "for you are addressing a god." "Oh? And what are you going to do about it, bitch? Send me hell itself?" Kami grew angry at being addressed as such by this mortal and made her anger known by slapping him hard across the face. "I had felt bad for you at first, but after that little upset I am now over it," she said as she composed herself once more, since a god needed to look the part. "And is that supposed to mean anything?" said Naruto as he spit the blood in his mouth out at her feet, "'cause you do not scare me." Naruto wasn't really aware of it at the moment, but while he was the dominant part of the merging of the two souls, his anger was gifted to him by the Kyubi himself. His rage only grew by the second since he was doomed to suffer from the actions of others, and as his fury grew, the ground around him glowed red and cracked as it did when Kami became angry herself. "My entire life I have suffered for something that was not my fault. I was cursed to bear the burden of containing a demon in my gut that I had no say on the matter, since I was nothing more than a newborn child with no voice of his own to stop the man who not only ruined my life in its entirety but now his actions have caused me to suffer even in death. I will not stand for this." "You have no choice," said Kami as she summoned heavenly chains that wrapped around Naruto and held him down. Doing so made him remember his execution, and his anger rose up once more as he did. "Even though you may send me to suffer for an eternity," said Naruto as he felt as his body became squeezed by the chains around him, "I will return to find you. And when I do I will break you. I will make you suffer as I have suffered for years, and I will enjoy every single moment that you scream in pain." Naruto's eyes glowed red as his rage reached his limit, and he used the power behind it to break free from the chains that Kami had used to hold him. Kami looked at him in genuine surprise, since he had just broken through her heavenly chains, which should not have been possible in the first place. Yet she quickly recovered from the shock and used her power to encase him in a pyramid of heavenly energy. "You have power that shouldn't exist," said Kami as she prepared the portal that would send Naruto to his final destination. And because of that, drastic measures must be taken to ensure that you stay sealed away. So instead of the depths of hell itself, I am forced to send you to the realm of Mu, where you will remain for eternity. Alone. Kami then opened the portal leading into a realm of utter darkness, and Spartan kicked him through it. All the while Naruto screamed that he would make her suffer once he returned, and continued to do so until she shut the portal and the sound of his voice was cut off, so she no longer had to listen to his voice. Kami sighed after the portal sealed shut. The things I do for humanity itself. Well, no matter, his soul will be devoured, and that will be the end of that nuisance, said Kami as she used her power to repair the cracks in the area before she teleported herself back into her home in the heavens. Mew, Naruto screamed in rage as he floated in the endless darkness. He would find a way out of this realm and do as he had threatened to Kami. And as he floated endlessly, his mind darkened, since he would make her suffer by forcing her to watch as he killed off the race she loved so damn much. He would eliminate humanity to the point of extinction, and he would revel in the fact he did so. So finally a new body has arrived within this realm, said a voice that was sounding like a person was hissing the words. Oh great, said Naruto sarcastically, and who is this, might I ask? Is it another so-called god here too? Tell me that I must suffer for the sins of another and banish me to another plane of existence. Cause if so, I want to know what could be possibly worse than the realm of Mu, which literally means nothing. You are mistaken, boy, hissed the voice again, I am no god. I have existed longer than time itself. The gods of this world are lies, said the voice with power behind it that caused him to shake in fear, since it was something he had no way to describe even if he had the time to try to. Why do you say that they are lies? The world as you knew it is not the way that it was, nor is it the way that it is supposed to be. In the beginning there was simply the darkness, which is what I am. And out of nowhere the light shines upon me and begins to dampen my power as well as my influence on everything. Over time I have found worthy vessels to gift my power to at a terrible cost to combat the forces of the light, and for eons the balance was kept in the world. But over time newer gods appeared and worked in unison to seal me away in this dimension that they made just for me. They think that they can use me as a pet or a slave that will devour all they send here who is a threat to their power. And I do, for I need to feed since my essence is waning in time. So boy, what have you done to find yourself within my realm? Naruto explained to the darkness how his life had been up to this point, and he somehow knew without visibly being able to see it that the darkness was impressed with his power to stand up to Kami for even the shortest of times before he was sent here. Naruto now understood why he was sent here, since she had expected the darkness to just consume him like everything else it had done to over the eons. Your power fascinates me, boy, said the darkness as it began to cover Naruto like a thick blanket, and I believe we can help each other here. And how exactly do you plan to help me, said Naruto, who was not really buying into what the darkness was saying, since it was obviously evil in ways he could only imagine. I have been here far too long. Even though I have consumed those rarely banished into my realm, I have grown too weak and will soon perish. This was the idea for the gods of the world, since with me gone they can mold reality as they wish it to be. I hold reality together by existing within it like a glue of immense strength, and these gods wish to take my power for themselves. They have blessed their own creations known as humanity with their love and power throughout history, while I try to usurp and undermine their attempts with those who bear my power. But my plan failed to yield the results I wished to happen, and my children have been forced into hiding since humanity has taken over the world with the aid of the gods themselves. My children remain in hiding to this day, and I cannot aid them as I am, so I must be reborn anew to set the balance right once more. And how exactly are you planning to become reborn, as you say? Asked Naruto with a raised eyebrow, and also who exactly are your children? Those that humanity has deemed as monsters are my children. Vampires, werewolves, trolls, etc. These are my children who had to hide themselves due to humanity's greed and desire to wipe them out. And why don't your children fight back in some way to claim the land for themselves? The gods make it all but impossible for them to flourish or grow since they favor the humans so much. And how many of these gods are there? There were thousands when I was sealed away in this realm, but I only sense 3 still left to this day. One I sense lives in a realm of light while another lives in the realm of man itself yet transports others above or below. And finally there is a god that rules below, and from him I sense so much hatred within him. So say I accept this offer that you are offering me, said Naruto as he thought about it for a bit. What exactly is the catch here? You must have some type of ulterior motive to offer me a deal of any sort. You are the perfect being to use as a catalyst to begin the cycle of rebirth. And when you say rebirth, what exactly are you implying there? My powers shall be yours to command, and yet they will be limited at first since you will be stuck in human form for the first few thousand years. And yet once the transformation if finally complete, you will become as I once was and engulf the universe in the power of the darkness once more. Okay, said Naruto as he chuckled a bit, I admit that your offer has gotten my interest. But I will only accept it if you tell me why exactly you are doing so. It is simply because I refuse to wither away as the false gods planned for me. I will not die while they still live, and with you as my successor to my power, they will cease to exist by your hands. And that is good enough for me to pass on. Then if that is the reason, I accept your offer, said Naruto with a grin, since he was so going to enjoy hurting Kami herself when he got his hands on her along with so many others out there. The darkness then covered him up and solidified into a cocoon of sorts that put him asleep to allow it to seep into his being. As it did, the darkness looked at the boy with so much potential and fully understood why Kami had sent him here to hopefully die by its power. It was a long-lost fact that long ago demons were far more rampant in the world before mankind ever came into being. It was only because of the fact that they followed only the will of the darkness that the gods created humanity to serve them as well as to wage war against the demons that lived in the world. And for the longest of times the world was in a stalemate of monster vs humanity, but the gods found a way to seal the darkness away into the realm of Mu, and it had stayed there ever since. While it was stuck here, it was still able to see the world from the eyes of his children, but could offer no assistance or aid of any sort, since all it could do was observe. So it did just that. There was only ever one case in history of this happening, but the fact that it did frighten the gods, since it jeopardized their positions of power that they had spent so long making for themselves in the absence of the darkness. There was a young man, with one of the most pure of souls around, that was possessed by one of the most powerful demons to exist at the time. The demon perished during the possession, but his power had gone to the kid who used it to fight other demons to protect mankind. The gods stayed out of the fight since they sensed that his power was enough to challenge their own, and only came down once he had been killed himself. The human race had gone extinct, and yet the so-called gods of the world just sat and watched as it happened, since they were afraid to die themselves. How hypocritical of them! But in the end, once the boy was dead, the gods finally descended upon the earth and killed the demons that existed still and remade humanity once more. The darkness was seeing as what remained of his children perished, but a few hid themselves well enough to avoid extinction. And it was those that survived that were ancestors to the various monsters that live today. They had tried to take out humanity long ago when they came to the realization that humanity was too greedy and would just take what they want from everything they could, but that war ended in failure since they were aided once more by their gods. So the monsters hid away once more to wait until the day that their own god would aid them and wipe out the infestation known as humanity off the face of the earth itself. And now the darkness was able to grant his children their wish. Naruto was just like that boy had been all so long ago. He was the purest soul to exist in the world, only trying to find acceptance from those who only hurt him. But he was merged with the foulest of demonic creatures by his own father. And thus another one of his kind was born to cause trouble once more. The darkness felt itself fading away as the last of his power was being infused into the boy, and its only regret was that it couldn't see what he would do to the world. And with that thought, the darkness faded from existence, reborn into his new body. And as it did, Naruto opened his eyes, once filled with a deadly passion and hatred for all that was born of the light itself. No longer were his eyes blue as they were when he was still alive, but now they were an unholy gold. And as the cocoon that had encased him shattered once the process of transference was complete, Naruto laughed as he now had the power to change the world. 3 years later, Satan sat on his infernal throne with his head on his hand since he was so very bored at this moment. He wished that something would happen to liven up the day, but so far nothing happened. He along with the Shinigami and Kami herself were all that were left of the gods in the world since they had killed off the rest over the course of history. The three of them were siblings, so they decided to keep the power that would be there once the darkness faded for themselves. When it happened, instead of share it with so many others. Satan was bored since there was nothing to do today. Sure, there were souls to torture, but that had become stale a few hundred years ago. "My lord," said an impish demon that flew into his throne room. "What is it?" said Satan with a bored expression. "My lord, the Mu barrier is cracking." Satan's face went pale as he heard this. That seal had been made to not only seal the darkness off, but to also cut him off from any form of energy that would make him stronger. Sure, he as well as his sister threw a few unsavory souls into Mu to have the darkness eliminate them, since it was so hungry for energy of any sort it would do so without a second thought, but now the barrier was cracking somehow. How was this possible? Summon every demon in hell itself to surround the barrier. "All of them, my lord," said the imp in shock, since that was a lot of demons to send. "Yes, all of them." The imp then flew out the window to spread the word to all he could. Satan quickly ran towards his armory and suited up with his infernal armor, which was armor forged in hellfire itself, and set his body ablaze as he wore it himself. He put on his helmet and sheathed his sword, which was also covered in flames since it too was made out of hellfire. Once H was prepared, he sprouted wings of fire, which made you wonder what the fuck was this guy's fetish with fire everywhere, and flew towards the barrier. All realms were connected in some way, with Mu being connected to hell itself, with the barrier that separated them being in the literal darkest/deepest hole in hell itself. When Satan arrived near the hole that led into Mu, he saw what the imp had seen. Surrounding the hole were hundreds of pillars of various colors, each one made by a different god in the past, and each was shooting a beam into a large sphere of energy that was itself shooting beam down into the hole itself. And now each one of the pillars was cracking as well as falling apart down to their foundations. Over half of them were already broken, and it was in that one moment of time that Satan truly regretted betraying the others and having them killed, since without them they had no way to remake the seal. His only saving grace was that the darkness had been sealed for so long that it was obviously weak and was using the last of its power to escape. So when it arose from its prison, Satan would kill it once and for all and claim the power that they had been waiting eons for. His demonic legions arrived as the last of the pillars shattered. They readied their weapons as well as their magic to use on the signal of their master. They saw the sphere that held the barrier closed begin to crack rapidly from the strain it was under. And soon it too shattered, but unlike with the pillars, when it did there was a massive shock wave that was felt by all in hell. As soon as the demons got their footing back, they were ordered to fire into the hole, which they did as they were ordered. For several long minutes, they continued to do so until Satan ordered them to stop their attack. Satan looked with fear at the hole from a distance, but nothing happened. He sighed a breath of relief since he had stopped the darkness from escaping. But that was not the case, since out of the hole came hundreds of tendrils made of pure darkness that grabbed the demons that surrounded the hole and pulled them in. Those that weren't pulled into the hole stepped back in fear, but it was already too late to run. Out of the ground, thousands more of the tendrils sprang from the ground and pulled the demons down. Satan watches this in utter fear. He saw an orb arise from the hole and land on the edge itself. It opened up like a flower blooming, and out of it stepped a young man with jet black hair that reached his shoulders, and a fancy-looking set of armor that was all black as well. The man calmly walked towards Satan himself, who was too scared to properly do anything as the demons moved out of his way of this dark man. "So you are the devil himself," said the man as he looked Satan in the eyes with his golden ones that sent shivers up his spine as he looked at them. "'Cause all of my life I had heard about how the devil was someone who would torture a person's soul for all eternity. A being of pure evil that had the power to rival heaven itself. But I have to say that I am disappointed to see that you don't live up to the legends in any way that I imagined." "Who are you?" asked Satan as he pulled out his blade to smite this man before him. "My name is Naruto," said the now named dark man, "but that is irrelevant to what you really wish to know. I am the second darkness here to correct all that you as well as the other false gods have done. You will do no such thing," shouted Satan as he used his blade as a catalyst and blasted his flames towards Naruto to kill him. Naruto just simply stood there with his hands behind his back and took on the full blast of the attack. Satan pumped every ounce of power he could into the attack, draining himself as he did it, but making the flames turn blue as he did since that was the hottest of flames to use. For a full several hours he did this, until his energy was wiped out and he fell to one knee. He used his sword as to keep himself balanced, but he smiled thinking that he had killed the brat since he was no longer there. "Such arrogance," said Naruto from behind Satan, who paled as he heard the voice of the man he killed. He didn't have the time or the strength to dodge the blow Naruto hit him with that launched him miles away from the hole, yet Naruto just opened a portal in the distance as well as next to him so that Satan was brought back to him. Naruto grabbed his still mobile body by the throat and slammed it down hard into the ground. "It took the combined might of hundreds of false gods to seal me up the first time," said Naruto as he stomped his foot onto Satan's chest, which caused him to scream in pain. "And yet you thought that you could kill me by yourself? That is quite literally the definition of pride right there, since even the combined might of all of you couldn't kill me, and that was why you had me sealed away, since you were all so weak, waiting for me to wither and die like greedy children of a rich person. But now I am free, and there is no one to stop me from correcting all of your mistakes." And before Satan can voice a complaint of any sort, Naruto pierced his chest with his bare hand and ripped out his heart. "What is this?" chuckled Naruto as he took a large bite out of the heart before he summoned a tendril with teeth and fed it to it. "The devil has a heart. And a finely aged one at that." Naruto then summoned more tendrils to consume the body itself. The process took a few minutes, but in the end Satan was gone. "Demons of hell, hear me," said Naruto in a voice that carried on throughout hell itself. "Satan is dead, and soon hell itself will be no more. Rejoice, since your suffering is now at an end." Naruto then slammed his hand into the ground, doing so caused it to turn jet black and begin to crumble into nothing. The demons that saw this began to run as Naruto laughed at their vain attempts to escape the inevitable. While it was true that demons were not born of the light, Satan was, and he was the one who made these ones, so they had to go. Slowly the realm of hell crumbled apart into nothing, and as it did, Naruto felt himself grow stronger as the spirits that should have been sent to the void were now sent there. When the gods had sealed away the darkness, they had also created heaven and hell as a means to weaken it, since the dead returned to the void. And with those two planes of existence in effect, the souls were sent there instead of their rightful destination. So now Naruto was fixing that as he saw the loss of hell wither away. And as he saw this, he smiled as he opened a portal to the mortal realm. For he had all the time in the world to accomplish his goals, and he had an entire army of children born of the darkness to rally for his goal to come true. The extinction mankind. In the land of Eostia, the lands that were located in the far eastern lands far from the elemental countries, humans and dark elves have fought for supremacy for over a century. The dark elves ruled over a race of Monsters that have raided the human lands for generations, capturing and defiling their women to help increase their numbers since they were constantly dwindling from the humans hunting them. Aided by various powerful bands of mercenaries who specialize in killing monsters, the human kingdoms have gradually pushed back their rivals into the darkness of the underground region, their former kingdoms. Lost to them as well as now occupied by the humans that forced them to retreat. Their numbers were thinned out greatly to the point that there was infighting within their own ranks that separated them to the point that they were no longer a threat to the humans who had pushed them off their land. But the mercenaries would not settle for these victories. Led by the cruel General Volt, the Cell Swords declared independence from the humans that hired his mercenary group to aid them in their campaign to eliminate the threat. With the support of the savage orcs they found after they split from the rest of the monsters, their new nation attacked human and dark elf alike in a vain attempt at carving out a kingdom where men reign supreme and women are little more than slaves. Even the dark elves would be conquered and their queen taken prisoner if their plans came to fruition. The sole hope for peace in these lands rested with a fellowship of 7 princess knights, handpicked by the goddess of the high elves. But is there power enough to cleanse the evil from their world? If things had gone the way that Volt had wanted, then they would have failed to protect their lands and would suffer such a cruel fate. But they were spared such a fate, only to suffer one just as bad from another. 7 years later, the journey towards the eastern lands was a long one for Naruto. Usually people would say it was hard as well as long, but Naruto was now an entity with the power that easily surpassed the gods themselves, so there was no challenge for him as he traveled east. And even though he was traveling far from his birthplace, he was not alone in his travels. He had been dead for 3 years and the world had changed for the worse when he returned to the realm of man. He found out that all the places that he had helped in the past had fallen to the armies of Fire Country. That Minato had killed the daimyo himself and proclaimed himself emperor with a decree that all who refused to bow before the might of his armies would fall and all who had any problem with that were executed without a trial of any sort. The people of Fire Country followed him with complete loyalty since they wanted a leader that would fight beside them instead of the snooty noble that had been handed the throne due simply because of his royal blood, which didn't do him any good in the long run since it flowed out of his body like anyone else with a slashed throat. Many had assumed that he was bluffing about that and openly opposed a man who took the throne by force unlike the other daimyos in the world. All those Naruto had helped began to rally others to try and get them to aid them and destroying the place that would kill off someone like Naruto. Yet Minato made good on his word and quickly and brutally slaughtered so many while annexing their lands into his own growing Fire Nation. Out of all the casualties, the ones that made him feel sadness for it were Tajuna and his family, Koyoki, Shin, Kankuro, as well as Temari. In a way Naruto was glad that they were dead since his plan was to kill off humanity as a whole and now he didn't have to order his friends killed since his enemies had beaten him to it. Gore had tried to protect his family during the siege of Suna, but while his power was impressive given the fact that it was sand-based and they were in the desert, Kushina as well as Naruto were able to negate his powers with their chakra chains until seals were placed on his body so he could be transported back to Konoha. He was forced to watch as so many of his loyal men were executed before him in order to break his will. Each one of them praised his name and declared that they were proud to serve their Kazekage. Even his brother Kankuro was fearless when it was his turn on the chopping block. It was Temari that was given a different form of punishment since Minato didn't want her family bloodline to die out and made plans to have his men breed her so they could have more soldiers with her genetics in the future. It was at this point that Gaara's will broke since he had to make the hardest decision of his life at this moment. He used the last of his chakra he could muster to form a solid piece of rock. He then launched it into Temari's head, killing her instantly to save her from such a fate. Minato then knocked Gaara out in anger since a powerful bloodline had just gone to waste. Gaara was placed into a special cell that sealed away his power so that they could find a vessel that could be used to contain his Biju without succumbing to its insanity. And yet they never found one to do so since Naruto helped to free him from his prison. Gore was happy to see his friend as he appeared from the darkness of his cell and freed him from his chains. As he was freed from his chains, he burst into tears since he had been forced to kill his sister to stop her from being raped repeatedly. Naruto had been there to console him as he felt his sadness turn to rage like Naruto's had years ago. Naruto had been there to offer him a chance to help him get his revenge against all of them, to which Gore agreed immediately. Naruto used his power to fuse Shikaku with his soul to make him a sand demon. He kept his human form, but his body could turn to sand at any point and be solidified into solid weapons as well as use it to turn into an enormous form. No longer was he human, he was now Naruto's brother, down to the genetics via his transformation. There was another who traveled east with the two of them and her name was Fu. She had been the Jinchuriki of Taki, and like most other Jinchuriki, she was mistreated by those in the village. She had been found by a Konoha spy since Taki was so well guarded and Konoha had no real intel on their village. They promised Fu a better life if she helped them invade her village. Fu decided to help them since she was sick and tired of the crappy life she had lived up to this point. So she gave them the information that they wanted. The invasion went off without a hitch with the soldiers of the Fire Nation killing off all who resisted. And once it was over, Fu went with the soldiers to live a better life as she was promised. She arrived in the village and was immediately subdued and thrown into a cell. She was told that she was going to be used to breed more soldiers as well as have her biju sealed into another vessel once they found a way to do so without her being killed. Yet just like with Gaara, they never got the chance with her since Naruto did the same thing to her as he had done to Gaara with combining their souls together to make a demon out of her. She had been reluctant at first since she had been promised a better life once already and was betrayed, but she had seen the look in his eyes when he told her that he would never betray her. And she listened to him and decided to follow him. Once they got into the eastern lands, it took quite some time to rally the monsters that would become the main force of his army. There was far too much tension between the races and it made Naruto fully understand why the humans were able to keep them down since their numbers were so low when they were separated like they were. He had found each one and forced them to submit to his authority, and like he expected they tried to fight him instead. But once he killed a few of them, they realized they were too weak to stand up to him and chose to follow him in his goals of extermination. It was when his numbers became large that he was met by the man Vold himself. He talked about their forces teaming up to bring down the kingdoms and subjugate the women of them into nothing more than sex slaves to the men of the world. He ranted on about the joys of having such a kingdom, but was stopped when he heard Naruto laugh at his offer. Naruto kept laughing for quite a bit while Vold grew more and more angry as he was being looked down upon. He told him that he would kill Naruto and his brother and take Fu for himself to become a personal fucktoy for himself. Naruto just laughed harder as he said that and watched Fu step forward with a scowl on her face. Faster than the eye could see, she used her hands to release stings from her palms that were sharp as razor wire and used it to decapitate the man who had just boldly stated that he would rape her. The men that followed charged forward to avenge their fallen leader, but Naruto beat them to the punch since he used his tendrils to pierce all the hearts of the men charging at him. The bodies were then all buried with sand by Gaara after they all fell over dead. The orcs that had joined up with Vold saw that following Naruto was the better option and pledged loyalty to him. So with the orcs on his side, he was finally ready to ask for the help of the most powerful of all those deemed monsters by the humans. Olga Discordia. The meeting with the queen. FYI, Naruto's outfit is Arthan's from FF15. Naruto had entered the throne room of the Queen of the Dark Elves while he used his power to keep his army invisible. He didn't want to attack her, but if a show of force was needed then that was exactly what he would give her if the situation called for it. She sat on her throne with her guards surrounding him since he had snuck into her underground palace uninvited. If she was shocked by that fact in any way, she did not show it if her expression was anything to go on. "Hello there, your majesty," said Naruto as he politely bowed to her. He saw this goddess of a woman that stood before him, and the lust within him rose up as he did. He just had to make this woman his queen, since she was flawless in every way. While he may be the second incarnation of the darkness itself, he was still in a human male body for the next few thousand years, and he had needs that he would fulfill. "Who are you?" said Olga with a voice that was beautiful yet emotionless. "My name is Naruto, your highness. And I have come here today to speak to the queen of your race about an alliance. But alas, I see no queen before me, but a dark-skinned goddess that words fail to describe the sheer beauty of." "Flattery will not work on me," said Olga as she signaled her archers to get their bows ready to fire on her command. "I say that in truth, your highness, and not in an attempt to flatter you," said Naruto with a chuckle. "So why have you come here today to speak to me?" "As I said, I am simply here for an alliance between our armies to complete a common goal." "And what goal might that be?" said Olga with a look of curiosity on her face. "Why, the complete extinction of the human race, of course." As he said that, there was a deathly silence that filled the room, since they believed this man to be insane to have such a goal as that. They had been trying to fight the humans for years, but had failed at every turn so far. "Are you quite mad?" shouted Olga as she slammed her hand onto the arm of her throne. "Do you have any idea what you have just said?" "That I wish to make humanity as a whole extinct." "Yes, I know what I said, your highness. And what makes you think that you can possibly do what we have failed to do so many times in the past?" "Well, first off, I'm optimistic. And secondly, I have the power to do so quite easily. But I see that you are not fully convinced about that, so I propose a wager between us." "And what type of wager is it that you are wanting?" "It's quite simple, your highness," said Naruto with a smirk that made Olga blush for some reason. Her faithful bodyguard Chloe saw this and growled as she did. "My wager is for you to ask me to deliver anything to you, no matter how impossible it may seem to acquire. If I am able to get the thing that you wish, then not only will your army join my own in my campaign against humanity, but you will also rule by my side as my queen." No sooner did he say those words that Chloe rushed forward to try and cut his head off for his insolence. But her sword was blocked by magic when it was a few inches away from connecting, and the whole time Naruto didn't flinch, nor did he stop smirking as she did this. Chloe looked back and saw Olga's hand was lighted up from using her magic to stop Chloe from hurting the man. "There is no need for that," said Olga with a calm expression on her face. "But your highness," started Chloe before she was cut off. "Silence. Now, you stated that you can grant me anything I desire." "That is what I said," said Naruto as he pushed Chloe's sword away with a finger and walked towards Olga. "So what is it that you desire the most?" "There is only one thing I desire," said Olga with a glare on her face, but the glare was not towards Naruto, but towards another who was not in the room. "And that is the capture of the queen known as Celestine. She led the humans that drove us from our homes. If that is all you require, then I shall bring her to you." "You make it sound so simple," said Olga with a raised brow. "That is because for me it is quite simple," responded Naruto with a grin that once again made Olga blush for some reason. Naruto then raised his hand, which caused the guards to stiffen a bit since they thought he was going to attack in some way, but all he did was snap his finger. Once he did, the illusion he cast on his army faded away and they became visible once more. They surrounded the room with their superior numbers, which frightened the guards at first, but they saw that they did not have weapons drawn or any form of killing intent, so they were not trying to attack them. "How did they get in here?" asked Olga in shock that so many troops had gotten into her throne room. "When one wields the type of power as I do, it is quite easy to do things such as this. So I will go and bring you the person you asked me to." Naruto then whistled, to which his soldiers walked out of the room and towards their new destination. Weeks later, the kingdom that Celeste lived within was the central kingdom to the land, with many people making pilgrimages. to it since the woman was the vessel of Kami herself and wished to be blessed in various ways ranging from good health to a bountiful crop. Celeste would bestow these blessings upon those who deserved it, but would turn away those who did not. The whole scenario made Naruto sick to his stomach and he was looking forward to the siege of their kingdom. The plan was simple, since with the main kingdom under the control of the enemy, the others would send their armies to try and save their goddess. That would be what Naruto wanted since all it would do is help his army by delivering fresh meat for those who ate human flesh and women to become new breeding sows to be raped for the rest of their natural life and breed more monsters until they were barren, to which then they too would be devoured once their use was over. Once their armies were all but wiped out, Naruto would send his men to conquer the place they came from and gather up all who resided within it to the city to show them what their fates now were and break their spirits before they suffered for the rest of their lives. Along the way, Naruto met more groups of monsters that had heard about him and wished to join him since they had already heard what he had done to the rest of those who opposed him and didn't want to die by his hands. He even met the last dragon alive, who explained that the rest of his race had been killed by humans as sport since they wished to brag about how strong and tough they were to kill a dragon. So because of all the new recruits, it took longer than expected to reach their destination, but in the end they did. The enemy didn't know they were there since they were invisible due to the powers of the darkness along with it being dusk so it was darker than usual. Naruto surveyed the area and cracked a smile along with his brother and sister since their bloodlust was coming to an all-time high. It had taken some time to get to this point but now was the beginning of the end for the human race. So Naruto had his arachnoid soldiers climb the walls and kill the guards that were on night watch. They proceeded to drag the corpses away to be used to lay eggs within so the children would have food. It was then that Naruto decided to go for the shock and awe tactic. So he dropped the illusion and had his men scream out in rage as they charged towards the front gate that was still open since the guards in charge of raising it were dead. The people in the city saw this large army appear out of nowhere and begin to charge their city. The civilians were scared at this and began to flee further into the city in hopes that the guards would be able to stop the enemy forces. Naruto's army entered the city and began to split up with the orders to kill all but the women and children since they were still needed. So the city was attacked and people were killed. A group of orcs threw spears at a group of people as a single person in an alley saw them die from the spears piercing their chests. When the man tried to run away, an arachnid jumped from the building itself and bit into his head, causing her venom to go directly to his brain. There were explosions all over the city as Naruto's army used magic to blast open the doors to the shelters all over and then the lizard men would come forward and breath fire into the room so that all inside would burn alive. And his army laughed as they heard the pain screams of the humans as they burned. Sure there were guards that tried to fight back, but the attack caught them completely unaware and they were swiftly killed off due to them not being prepared. The guards who were women were knocked out and dragged away to be used as sows while the men were killed as they watched their friends and loved ones being dragged away. Naruto walked into the city as the carnage went on all around him and whistled a tune as he as well as his siblings walked towards the main temple that Celeste was located in. He saw what his army had done to the place, and he had to admit that he liked what he saw them do. He was really looking forward to seeing his army head to the east and kill of the Fire Nation, but he would bid his time and solidify his power over the west before he did just that. His siblings were just as amused with the carnage surrounding them as he was, and he was happy that he had saved them before he came this way since it was always nice to have such family, one that understands you. As they made their way to the temple, Celeste was there with her priests, each who was on their knees in prayer since they knew that they needed the goddess herself to aid them if they were to survive this assault on their village. All the while Celeste was floating in the middle of the room as her body began to glow with heavenly power. But the process was interrupted when they heard a loud bang at the massive door that led into the temple. The head priest told one of the altar boys to bar the door, and he ran towards it and placed his hand over a seal by it. The door began to glow to show that it was protected by magical means, but then it turned black as it withered away into nothing. The boy walked backwards in fear since there was a large army that was behind the door, and before he could do anything, an arrow lodged right into his throat, and he fell over while he tried to pull it out in vain as the blood leaked out of the wound. The priests saw this and were unable to continue as they were too frightened to do so since the enemy was right there. They tried to flee out the back through a well-hidden passage, but they were killed as soon as they tried since Naruto had Gaara go through the back just in case they did just that and use his power to crush them all with stones he ripped out of the floor to use. Celeste could only stand there as she was surrounded by the enemy and wait to see what they could do. For even though she was the vessel of Kami herself, she had no power to call her own since the power she used came from prayer so that Kami would do as she asked. So this is the heavenly vessel known as Celeste, said Naruto as he stepped forward to show himself. You monster, shouted Celeste in rage, have you any idea what you have done? I killed off the vast majority of the city, said Naruto as he thought about it, and I have taken those still alive hostage since they are still of use for the moment. What use could you possibly have for us? Why for breeding of course, said Naruto with a sinister grin as his men laughed at her question. We need more soldiers and the women of the city will help provided them until they can bear no more. You would do such a thing to your own kind. My own kind, laughed Naruto along with his men, you are gravely mistaken my dear. I am not human. I may have a human form, but I am not human in the slightest. Then what are you? Asked Celeste since she was curious as well as scared of this man before her. I am simply the darkness made flesh, said Naruto. Please, pleaded Celeste as she got to her knees to beg, do what you will with me, but please spare the children for they are innocent. Naruto looked at the woman with a raised eyebrow and opened a small portal that he sent his hand through to grab a hold of something. When he pulled it back out, there was a human baby, a girl to be exact. Look at this child here, said Naruto as the baby cried since it sensed evil, it is so pure and innocent. She can't understand the fact that her father is dead and her mother is being raped. Senseless to bear her a half-sibling. Her mind is too young to comprehend this fact, and she never will be able to do so. Naruto then threw the baby behind his back and she fell to the ground. Her cries grew more since now she was in pain from the fall. Naruto whistled a tune and out of the shadows came a pack of wolves that had been with him for quite some time now. They instinctively followed him near the beginning of his journey since they could sense an alpha male and in return, Naruto fused them with a bit of the darkness to make them stronger as well as bigger. These were his night wolves, and right now they were hungry. So they set upon the crying child and ripped her to shreds as they consumed her flesh. Celeste was utterly speechless as she saw this monster of a man kill a baby in such a manner. How could you do something so horrible? She said with tears in her eyes. How? Said Naruto as he opened up another portal and pulled out another baby, easily. I do it like this. This baby Naruto killed himself by twisting its head, thus breaking its neck before he fed it to his wolves as well. Or this. This baby was killed by Naruto ripping it in half. Or this. This one was killed when Naruto grabbed it with both hands and broke its spine on his knee. Or even like this. The final one he killed by simply crushing its skull with his bare hand. Do you see it now, or do you want me to keep going? Said Naruto with a smirk on his face. Why do you do this? We are innocent. Innocent, growled Naruto, humanity as a whole is not innocent. How many other races have suffered because of humanity and their views of themselves as the superior race that can do as they please and say fuck it to any form of consequence. We are the chosen race of the goddess. Yet you are an elf. So I question that logic. But you are right that you are the chosen race of the goddess Kami herself. But there is a problem there. And what is this problem you speak of? I am an entity stronger than your gods. And Unfortunately for you as well as the rest of humanity, I am strictly against the existence of humans and all races that have joined up with them. So your time is up, and humanity will be wiped out and your gods can do nothing to stop us. Kami will come for you," shouted Celeste in anger as Naruto had her bound before he opened a portal behind her. "My dear sweet Celeste," said Naruto as he grabbed her face to look into her eyes, "that is what I am hoping for." He then pushed her through the portal. He told his men to enjoy themselves in his absence and to fortify the city since word would soon spread of what they had done, so they would need to be prepared for when that happened. Gore was left in charge along with Fu since he trusted them to hold the city quite easily. Olga's throne room. Olga was genuinely surprised when she saw a portal just open up out of the blue within her throne room, but was even more surprised to see Celeste thrown through it. Naruto followed through after her and closed the portal behind him as he did. Celeste was shocked herself to see Olga since she thought that Vold had killed her as agreed upon when she paid him to do it. But it seemed like he failed and she could only hope that Vold had died for his failure. "So the once great Celeste has graced us with her presence," said Olga with a smirk on her face, since this woman had led her army to kill off most of her army and force them into hiding so that the rest of them wouldn't perish as well. Celeste was about to say something in response to her remark, but before she could, her mouth was gagged with a tendril of darkness along with her hands being bound and pulled to the ground. "As promised," said Naruto with a polite bow, "I have delivered Celeste to you as you wanted." "So you have," said Olga as she walked forward with her magical staff at the ready since her plan was to burn this bitch into ash. She began to chant to power up her spell, but Naruto walked up to her and kissed her to make her stop, and as he did she kissed back with a passion since she was always saving herself for a strong man and this man was strong indeed to do as he did. "While it would give me great joy to see you burn this filth, my dear," said Naruto as they parted lips and held her chin to look into her eyes that were slightly glazed with lust, "but I need her alive for what I have planned. And I think you will like what I have planned." Naruto pulled out a bag from within his jacket pocket and opened it up. He stuck his hand in and pulled out black powder that he then surrounded Celeste in a circle of the stuff. Olga as well as her guards watched in fascination as he did so since they were quite unsure as to what the hell he was doing. Once the circle was made, Naruto began to chant as the priests had done back in the temple, and sure enough Celeste began to glow as she did then. It took a while since he was one person doing the prayers while there had been a few dozen when he stormed the temple, but in the end he got the results that he wanted. Her body exploded into a holy light that blinded all who looked at it for a brief second, and once it died down there was Kami herself. "Who has summoned me here?" she said in an authoritative voice. "Oh hello there Kami," said Naruto as he snapped his fingers. When he did, the black powder formed into a dome of dark energy that was completely transparent as well as sprouted chains that held her down since he didn't want her to move as he spoke to her. "Remember me? Who are you? And how dare you bind me in such a manner? Do you have any idea who you are dealing with?" shouted Kami as she wiggled around trying to get out of her bindings, but to no avail. "Oh, I know exactly who you are, you arrogant bitch," growled Naruto, "since you banished me to the realm of Mu not too long ago." As he said that, Kami's eyes widened since she now knew who he was. "Naruto," she said in utter surprise since she had thought that the darkness had dealt with him. "In the flesh," laughed Naruto, "and I do believe that you know exactly what I am going to do to you since I made a very specific promise before you banished me. You wouldn't dare. I am a goddess." "No," said Naruto as he slapped her hard across the face to the point that blood flew out of her mouth as he did. Her blood was like a normal human's and yet it glowed with a power that was not. "You are no goddess. You are just like the rest of the humans that you revere so much to the point that you protect them. You are a blight on this world that must be dealt with in the harshest of ways." Naruto waved his hands around a bit, and as he did multiple tendrils sprouted out of the ground and held her in a way that she couldn't move her body in any way. while hanging in midair. Naruto then grabbed a hold of her clothes and ripped them off her so that she was naked to all that were in the room. "What are you doing?" asked Kami in fear of the answer that would be given. "Preparing you," said Naruto as he had a large tendril appear behind her, poised to penetrate her ass, and it was a big one at that since he wanted this to hurt as much as possible. "Preparing me for what?" said Kami, but that was all she was able to say before the tendril pierced right through her sphincter and began to penetrate deeper into her body. Kami could only scream in pain as the tendril went deeper, its progress being clearly seen since the thing was big and it bulged out her stomach as it traveled through her intestines. "For your new husband, of course," laughed Naruto as he saw the once mighty goddess scream out in such pain. "I told you that I would break you in every possible way, and I meant every possible way." Naruto then just stood there next to his future wife as the guards as well as she looked on in amusement since the goddess that had protected mankind for so long was now suffering such a horrible fate. It took some time, but eventually the tendril had gone through her entire intestinal tract, and she looked fairly bloated since it had stretched her out pretty far, but she was an immortal goddess so she wouldn't die from it. The tip of the tendril had come out her mouth as she gagged on it. Once there, Naruto channeled the darkness through the tendril he had sent into her and felt as it began to corrupt her from the inside out. As she became corrupted, her body began to lose its heavenly glow as he sapped away her power. And soon the process was finished and he retracted the tendril from her body as well as the ones that held her in place let her go so she fell weak to the ground. "What did you do to me?" asked Kami weakly as she tried to get up, but her body was too worn out to do anything other than to look at the man who had violated her so gruesomely. "I took away your connection with the heavens," said Naruto as he looked at the woman now. While she was no longer the goddess she was still a looker. Not that he was interested in her in any way since she was nothing in comparison to Olga. "But don't worry since you will live since you still have your immortality. I just took your powers away from you." "How is this possible?" "When you sent me to Mu, I met with the darkness that was sealed there. We talked about how we ended up in such a shitty situation and I was offered a deal. I was used to help the darkness escape via being reborn through me. So here I stand above you Kami, the former goddess of the world, the darkness reborn." Olga as well as the guards in the room heard him say this and were full of joy as they did. Their most ancient of ancestors spoke of the darkness as their god and savior who was sealed away so that the false gods could take over, and it was because of their actions doing that had made it so that humanity could thrive as it had done for so long. They would go on to speak about how the darkness would return once more and aid not only their people, but all the people who were born of the darkness. "No," said Kami in shock since there was no way that the barrier had been breached. The darkness was supposed to be weak and near death already. Their plan for ultimate power was so close to being fulfilled and yet this brat had undone everything that they had set in place. "Yes," chuckled Naruto, "so do you think that you can kill me? Your brother thought the same way, but in the end I killed him with my bare hands as I ripped the heart out of his body and consumed his body so there was nothing of his left to find. You monster! It is true that I am a monster, but I am a monster of your making when you decided to play God. But I grow tired of this conversation. As it is you no longer have the power to aid humans against us, and so their days are now numbered. And unlike the last time when they went extinct, there will be no one to resurrect them this time around." Naruto then snapped his fingers, and as he did a very large portal opened up and out of it came a dragon. The people in the room were shocked to see one still alive since they had thought that all of them had been hunted and slain by the humans. "Say hello to your new husband," said Naruto as the dragon stepped forward and sniffed his new mate. "What do you mean by that?" asked Kami in fear. "Did you know that certain species of monsters can breed with human women to give birth to their young? Well, you are looking at one of them right now. It's impossible. He would tear me up from the inside, said Kami as she noticed the dragon's huge cock that was like a dog's in the sense that it was sheathed unless it was going to mate with something. And it was twice the size of Kami herself. I know that. Why did you think I let you keep your immortality? Out of the kindness of my heart. The dragon roared as he pounced forward and held Kami in place by holding her arms down with his own clawed hands. He then used his tongue, which was very long, to lick her body all over. Please, said Kami with tears in her eyes since she didn't want to be the breeding sow of a dragon, help me. That's not very nice, said Naruto as he stood in place since he had no intention to help her, since it was because of your blatant favoritism of humans that led to the near extinction of the dragon race. So it is only fair that you help it grow back to the numbers that it once was. Why is this happening? Said Kami as the dragon's tongue continued to lick her all over. Let me go. It was then that the dragon started to lick her vaginal area, which caused Kami to squirm even more in a vain attempt to get loose from its grip. But try as she might, she could not break free from its strong grip. Don't lick me there, said Kami as her face became flushed as her body began to betray her since it was enjoying the new sensations being inflicted upon it. But then suddenly it stopped its licking and swallowed up its tongue. He raised himself up and once again unsheathed his dick so that his mate could see what he was packing. It was massive in size and Kami shook in fear as she saw it above her body and go over her head. Don't tell me that it really plans to mate with me, thought Kami in fear. He then scooted back a bit and positioned his cock at her pussy entrance. Don't do that. If you shove that inside me I'm gonna. But she was never given the chance to finish that sentence since the dragon thrust through her vaginal opening and shredded her hymen in such a ruthless manner that the blood squirted out of her pussy as he did it. She screamed in pain since the pain was so agonizing that all she could do was scream as she felt her insides rip open to accommodate such a large intrusion. The dragon's cock was clearly visible since while inside her it made her seem like she was 9 months pregnant since it stretched her so much. Oh God, it hurt so much, shouted Kami as the tears fell from her eyes. The dragon then took this moment to shove his tongue down her throat. She coughed it up. Almost immediately though. You're tearing my womb apart. Please stop this. But the dragon didn't listen to her scream and just once again began to insert his tongue down her throat. This time he went deeper to the point that you could see the bulge in her neck so that she couldn't couch it up again. But eventually it retracted its tongue again. Stop this. I'm begging you, she said, but it was then in that moment that she felt the cock inside her grow even bigger than it was before. The dragon began to thrust harder as it did and faster as well. It can't be. Is it going to come? I don't want a monster's baby. She kept shouting this as the dragon kept thrusting into her until he finally released his seed deep within her to the point it bloated her up more than before. She screamed as he did, and once he was done, he retracted his cock back inside him and let her fall to the ground, as lots of his seed spurted out of her gaping abused pussy. Well, that was amusing, said Naruto as he clapped at the performance of the dragon. You keep it up like that, my draconic friend, and your race will thrive within a few short years alone. But now I will send you and your mate back to the cave I found you in so that you can continue your mating there. Have fun, my friend. Naruto then opened a portal to the aforementioned destination, to which the dragon picked up his mate in his teeth and walked through it. Naruto then ordered some servants to clean up the mess and looked at his future queen in the eyes. Shall we follow his example and head to a place a bit more private? Olga nods in response. The thing they just witnessed had made her face flush with lust. Indeed. My bedchambers are just beyond my throne. She then turned her attention to the 2 guards. You 2 stay here and report to me if there is any form of trouble. Yes, my lady, they say in unison. Naruto followed the queen as she leads him to her bedroom. It's quite a sight to behold. In it there was a large bed, enough for nearly a dozen people, which made him question why she had such a thing, since if he was guessing right she was a virgin. Beautiful paintings of various elven women, who he assumed were all queens before her, aline the walls. A massive wardrobe, housing many fine dresses of varying transparency, were visible, as was a ceiling-tall window with a balcony overlooking the kingdom that they now inhabited. They may be underground, but the place was expansive and far larger than one would guess. There's even a waterfall in the corner. The room was also littered with all kinds of plants, one of the walls even looks like it was made from the bark of a tree. Olga sat down on the bed, and asked, "Will this suffice?" "Indeed, my lady." "Then you may proceed, my lord. First you should remove your garments, so that I may see my lovely wife-to-be's beautiful body in its entire splendor." Without a second thought, Olga takes off her barely concealing dress and elegantly lays it down on the floor. His eyes widen as he now saw her body in full view, and it's even more beautiful than he initially thought. It takes all of his strength to hold himself back from jumping her. With a trembled breath, he says, "Now lie back and spread your legs." She does so without question, and Naruto joined her on the bed. He leaned down to give her some foreplay, but she says, "What are you doing?" "Excuse me. I thought the act of mating was with the penis, not your mouth." "Oh, well, you see, it helps to get you ready before we join. If I don't, then it will be a more painful experience." "I'm sorry, I didn't know," said Olga with a blush on her face, since this was all new to her. She was aware of what sex was, as was most of her people, but she herself had never experienced it. Naruto nodded in understanding. "I understand perfectly, so there is no need for apologies. Unfortunately, there is no way to make this pain-free, but I will make this as pleasurable as possible. It won't hurt for long, trust me." She chuckled. Trust. A simple term, and yet so strange of one. It is one of the most precious things we can have, and yet it is so fragile. One of the easiest things to break, and the hardest to rebuild. You have shown me no reason to doubt you, so I shall place my trust in you, and I do not trust lightly. Consider yourself honored." Naruto laughed to himself. Since it seemed like no matter what she had to appear in control of things. "I do consider myself honored to be in the mere presence of a living goddess such as you." She blushes at his words, and an uncontrollable smile spreads itself across her face. "You possess the gift of the silver tongue, along with the magic of the darkness that has been lost for a long time. Please, proceed." Wasting no time, he leaned down and spread her pussy lips with his fingers. The sight of her pink pussy next to her brown skin makes it stand out all the more. She gasps at the sensation, as clearly she has never touched herself before. She should come with little effort on his part. Needing no further encouragement, he lapped the entrance to her pussy with his tongue. Her pussy tastes simply divine to him. Like a sweet mixture of honey and flesh. She moans loudly at his services, and he took that as a hint to keep going. "Oh my gods, you were not deceiving me. This feels wonderful. It'll feel even better with my penis inside you." Naruto responded before plunging his tongue inside her. She tasted even better on the inside, he could certainly get addicted to her taste. Her walls were moist and bumpy, and clench around his tongue as though hugging it in a passionate caress. The little bumps all moved on their own around his tongue, as though massaging it. He couldn't wait to stick his cock inside her. She cried out in pleasure, and the guards that guarded the door from the outside nearly rushed to her side. With them only stopping on her command, as she shouted for them to remain outside of her chambers. With several laps around her insides, she starts to tremble, and Naruto knew she was close to coming. "Oh gods! Something's happening to me. I feel strange. I can't stop it. It's coming," she screams as she has her very first orgasm. Her walls clamp down tightly around his tongue, and her fluids spray into his mouth, which he happily gulped down. She fell limp on the bed, and breathed heavily. Naruto licked his lips, and leaned in close to her face. "How was it, my queen? I never knew such pleasures existed in the world. To think that a creature such as you possess such powerful magic. I am indebted to you, for showing me this pleasure. Oh, but we're not done yet, my queen. Not by a long shot." Her eyes widen, and she looked away with a deeper blush on her face. "We must continue now. May I be allowed to rest?" "No, you can't rest." She trembles at his words, and slowly nods. Then you may proceed." It's funny, despite being a queen, Naruto got the feeling that she liked to be ordered around, something that the darkness had witnessed with many women in power over the various eras of time. But he didn't dwell on that thought for long, as his cock is just about ready to explode with desire. He lined it up to her tight virgin pussy, lubing it up with her cum. The anticipation of making her his woman and his alone is nearly killing him. "My lord, are you certain your penis will fit? It is fairly large." "Absolutely. There might be some discomfort at first, but soon you'll be enjoying yourself far more than you thought possible." Then proceed." With that Naruto started to push inside her, and she moaned with a mixture of pain and pleasure. He gasped at how tight she was, since she was so tight that he had a hard time putting his cock in. He didn't want to be too forceful, as that might hurt her, but he didn't want to be too gentle either. But surprisingly, the little bumps on her wall seemed to be guiding him in, as though her body has waited for his cock for centuries. Finally, he came up to her barrier and paused for a moment. "My queen," he said. She looks up at him, the beginning of tears filling her eyes. "Why yes. This is the part where some pain will be involved, are you ready?" She nervously nods. Proceed." With her approval, he pushed past her hymen, and she lets out a large gasp, as a single tear runs down her cheek. But she didn't protest. As much as he thought she would, and continued to push inside her. It's simply incredible, and with every inch she let out a moan of pleasure. Her pussy seems to have a mind of its own, along with its own hands, stroking, massaging, and guiding his cock to her sweet spot. At about 3/4 of the way up his cock, he reached her cervix, and decided that's far enough on her first time. "Are you all right, my queen?" he asked between her moans. "Why yes, of course I am. Simply, give me a moment." He lied on top of his beautiful queen, and decided to give her a rest. Not only for her sake, but so he didn't have a premature orgasm. He smiled, and stared at her lips, begging him to sample them once more. Not one to forsake such beautiful things, he pressed their lips together. Though she gasped at first, she doesn't seem to mind it at all, so he pushed his tongue inside her mouth. Even her mouth tastes wonderful to him. She simply cannot be one born from this world. He was convinced that she was a living goddess, and that Kami had done as she did out of jealousy for the real goddess of the world that was Olga herself. She eventually gets into it, and kisses him back, wrapping her arms and legs around him. After a minute-long kiss, he broke away from her, and she let out a loud moan. A sliver of combined saliva drips from his mouth onto her pleasure-ridden face. "Do you like kissing, my queen?" She looks like she's having a hard time finding the words, the pleasure was so overwhelming. "Why yes. I want more. Kiss me more." He was not about to refuse a goddess request, and planted his lips firmly on hers again. With one smooth motion, he slowly removed his cock, only the push back inside. A muffled squeal comes from her blocked mouth, and she comes a second time. He nearly came himself from her vice-like pussy, but managed to hold back, growing into a steady rhythm. He backed away from their kiss to see how she's holding up, but it's only a second before she brings him into another kiss. Her grip around him is surprisingly strong and only getting stronger. It seemed like her dam that blocked her sexual desire had broken wide open, and because of that she would not stop until her body was fully satisfied, to which he would happily help in that. Just because he was the darkness reborn didn't mean he didn't know love, or in this case pure lust. With each thrust, his cock kisses her cervix, and despite wanting to, he was careful not to penetrate it. Olga finally released him from her dominating kiss, and she cries out, "More! Give me more of this pleasure." He was all too happy to oblige her. He took hold of her ankles and lifted her legs up, as he started to get serious with his thrusts. Olga gripped the bed sheets with all her strength, as her breasts bounced back and forth with each of his powerful thrusts. Her moans have turned into pleasure-drunken screams, and she came a third time. Naruto grunted at the force which her pussy clenching his rod, and was nearing his own orgasm. "Olga, I am about to come." She looks at him, her eyes half-lidded, and innocently asks, "See come? What do you mean?" She may know about sex to an extent, she was still unfamiliar with some of the terms used. "It's the final step to creating a baby. I'm going to put my seed in your womb, and from that a child will grow inside you. Then make it so. Fill me with your cum, my king," she cries, finding the words hard to form from the pleasure that was coursing through her body. With one final thrust, Naruto roared as he unloaded what felt like a lifetime's worth of semen inside her womb. She screams in pleasure, arching her back as the hot baby batter fills her up, making her come again. After what feels like forever, Naruto fell on top of her, the both of them exhausted. Naruto smiled as he saw her lay at his side for a few moments before she tackles him, and after a quick kiss asks, "Can we do that again? Who am I to deny my queen such a request?" Naruto said with a wicked grin. "Just what I wanted to hear from my king. Besides, you belong to me now, so you have no more right to deny me what I want." She giggled, and lines up his cock before sitting down on it. "Oh gods, it's even better the second time," she moans loudly. "And it'll keep feeling better and better the more we do it, my queen." She lies down on top of him, and gives you a quick kiss. With that the two of them fuck for hours on end, totally enraptured in each other's lust for one another. He came 6 more times, and she at least 20. He fuck her until they both nearly pass out, covered in sweat, wrapped in each other's arms. The two of them look deeply at one another before they fall asleep in the bed. The next several years had been good for Naruto and his army of monsters. Like he had expected to happen, many armies tried to attack the Central Kingdom in an attempt to not only take it back from them, but to rescue their goddess as well. But little did they know that their goddess was nowhere near the city, but was in fact being raped senseless by her dragon husband day after day non-stop. Her mind had been broken by the 3rd year, and she no longer knew anything other than moans and screams. She had laid multiple eggs that had hatched in time, and now there were a few dozen dragons that were growing strong under the tutelage of their father. And when the armies came to try and take back the city, they were fully unprepared for the horrors that would befall them, since the bodies that were not used for food were placed on pikes near the front gate, which demoralized the enemy when they entered, not knowing that they were already doomed once they entered the city. Naruto had helped to oversee the complete overhaul of the city to accommodate his army perfectly, to the point that each one of the races had their own area. Sure, the races mingled with each other, it was just an easy way to tell where they lived, with those who were bug-related living in their expansive underground area that ranged for miles under the city as well as in all directions. They were in charge of trap placement as well as sentry duty, since they could feel the vibrations of the enemy's armies coming in their direction and use their own means of communication to warn those within the city so that they would be prepared, unlike the poor bastards that had first resided in the city before it was rebuilt. Once within the village, the armies would be locked in and slaughtered since Naruto's army had the home field advantage with traps and knowledge of their arrival. At least a third of the army would perish in the initial ambush with spikes jutting out of the ground once they were over the holes that were well concealed. Then Naruto's forces would swoop in and deal with the rest of those who survived the traps. The men were gruesomely killed with their bodies being dragged away to be used as food to those who craved man-flesh. The woman would be taken to the remodeled temple, which was now their breeding grounds. This was where the women were raped and forced to conceive the offspring of the monsters that raped them. They were raped non-stop to the point that their minds broke. Naruto always made sure that there was one survival to deliver a message of war, which in reality was a row since he had his night wolves follow in secret to see what town had sent their army to foolishly attack them. Once he knew where they were, they would attack the city swiftly in their weakened state. Once the city was ransacked, the women were taken prisoner as well as the babies since to his night wolves, baby flesh was a delicious treat and he was a good master to them. Out of all the victims, there were a few one that Olga herself had taken great pleasure to see broken since they had been generals of Celeste's army. The first was Claudia Levantine, a holy knight and the commander-in-chief of the allied forces. Claudia was the strongest fighter among the general, and acted as Celestine's bodyguard. She was trained by one of the allied forces' strongest soldiers, her father figure and mentor, Grave Levantine. She would later marry her mentor's biological son, Klaus. However, despite being married for some time, she and Klaus were unable to produce any children, which was quite ironic since she had given birth to so many monster children in the years that followed. She had watched as her father-in-law had died in battle from a minotaur's axe cleaving him in half as he had tried to block the attack with his sword. The block had failed and had broken though his blade and went down the center of his body. The second was Alicia Arcturus, who was referred to as the Princess Knight of Iris. Alicia was a prestigious noble who was the only daughter of Eos, who was well known and highly honored through the army. Alicia was the older cousin to the Princess Prim, who she views and refers to as her younger sister. She also served as Prim's personal bodyguard, but utterly failed to defend her since the two of them bore witness to the room they were holed up in being overrun with demons of various sorts, and while there were other guards with her, they were killed off while she as well as Prim were held down and gang raped to the point that every inch of them was covered in demonic splooge. The third was Kaguya, the head shrine maiden of the continent and a foreigner from the Far East. Kaguya was stated to have a quiet personality and was extremely devoted to her religion. Like Olga, Kaguya possessed some magical abilities and could inflict curses. But it wasn't enough to stop her capture from those of the arachnoid race. To this day, she was kept deep underground where Fu herself, who led the arachnoid race as their queen, would lay her eggs into her personally since she was a lesbian and used her as a fuck toy and enjoyed seeing Kaguya pregnant with her young and kept her swollen with eggs the moment the last batch hatches and crawls out. Fu had others she used for the process as well, but she always paid the most attention to Kaguya above all else. The fourth was Maya, a wandering mercenary and former member of the Volt's Kuroinu group. When she was a member of the Kuroinu mercenaries, she fell in love with their leader, Volt. She was also very popular among their ranks, before leaving the group after she was chosen by Celestine to be one of her generals. She had been one of the few who was prepared when the attack came and had used her skills to slay many of Naruto's army. Since she had struck down many of their number, she was given to those with abnormally large cocks so that her pain would be immense before her mind became broken. She gave birth to twice as many as she had killed in the initial invasion of the city. The fifth was Lulu, an axe-wielding leader of the halflings. Halflings were small, childlike, solely female race of half-humans that could mate with any other species. Lulu, like the rest of her species, had superhuman strength and was skilled in manufacturing weapons. She was another of the few who had been prepared in time and was able to slay quite a few of Naruto's army members, but in the end she was captured by overwhelming numbers. And now her armor was stripped off of her and she was forced to wear slutty and flashy clothing and accessories. She now swings her hips like a machine, abandoning herself to the pleasure of the monsters who rape her. She was used for a time by the bigger monsters, but in the end she became a bitch for Naruto's night wolves, who used her to breed more of their pack to the point that they themselves became an army of their own. There were many others, and the breeding grounds only expanded with time since the women were taken well care of since they were pregnant with the offspring of their rapists. But Naruto cared little for them since he had his own woman to love. His tastes grew more exotic as time went by. As time went by and the surrounding villages fell in time, other monster races appeared from hiding, and joined up with his army to help him with the eradication of humanity. There were many races, and he had a concubine from most of them since Olga was his queen, but she knew that he had an inhuman libido and needed the help, otherwise she would never be able to walk again from the frequent bouts of sex that they had. There was the Minotaur, strong bull-like creature that possessed immense strength. They were formidable foes, and ones not to take lightly since they could overpower all but the strongest of foes, and even then they made them sweat. While the vast majority of the race was male, there were a few females as well. The one that he chose to be his concubine was known as Marilyn, and he had found her in a city locked away as a slave. She as well as her entire family had been captured, and she had been witness to her mother being raped by her father, who was human, as well as beaten severely over the years. He had even tried to rape his own daughter, but her mother had stopped him from doing so by saying she would do anything to please him as long as he would not touch their daughter. For several years, Marilyn was forced by her father to watch as he basically raped her mother in the most grotesque of ways, all the while trying to break her spirit and hear her give up and say that it was okay to have his way with Marilyn. But she never did break, and he grew angrier as she refused to break, so his tactics grew worse. In the end he grew tired of the game and threatened to slash her throat if she did not submit. Marilyn saw his mother smile at her as he held the knife to her throat and told her that everything would be all right. Her mother died in front of her as her throat was cut, and her father threw her into a cage in chains. He told her that she would stay in there until she begged him to fuck her like a slut, and until then she would not be fed. Marilyn prayed to whatever gods would hear her to deliver her from her prison, and a few days later, her prayers were answered when Naruto's army had arrived to slaughter the town. Her coward of a father hid away in his panic room that he made just in case something like this ever happened. Naruto was the one who found her in her cage and broke the lock with his bare hand and set her free. She had held onto him with tear in her eyes as she held onto him for support. She told him what had happened, and Naruto growled as he heard the actions of her father. He found the panic room himself, and ripped the fortified door off its hinges and threw the man at the feet of his daughter, who he looked up at and begged for mercy from her. She was handed a knife by Naruto, and she used it to stab her bastard father multiple times. All the while screaming as she did until her anger subsided. She then joined Naruto's army, and soon after presented herself to him as his concubine since her love for him had only grown from that moment on. She wore the chains that were placed on her as a constant reminder of her hatred for humanity as a whole, and it drove her forward to get stronger so as to never be put in such a position again. Not that her lover would ever let her let that happen. There were the centaurs, who just like the Minotaur were mainly males, but there were more females in their race than with the Minotaur. He chose a woman by the name of Centaurea Chianus, who unlike with Marilyn, there was not much of a story to tell there since all that had happened was that when the centaurs came into his service, their leader had offered up his daughter as a sign of good faith, and she pledged herself to him as his concubine. There were demons, which came in all shapes and sizes. But the only thing they all had in common was their demonic aura. The leader of them was known as Albedo, who was also his concubine since she like Olga liked strong men with a dark aura. Albedo had been betrothed to another dark master known as the Overlord, who had heard of Naruto and had foolishly tried to use the same hypnotic power he had used to control the rest of his army on him so as to annex his army and control Naruto's territory. Naruto had easily countered not only his hypnotic power, but his small army as well as his guardians himself. The attack was against him personally, and he took it as such since such a pathetic weakling had thought that he had the power to control him, and after a lifetime of being controlled by Konoha, any attempt to try and control him only pissed him off immensely. He fought, a term that he used loosely since the so-called fights he had with the Guardians were not much of a battle since they each lasted but a few seconds to his power, towards the throne room in the tower that the Overlord ruled over. It was here that he was attacked by Albedo, who he took a liking to and saw that she was under a hypnotic spell. He used his power to break her free from it and subdued the Overlord so he was on his knees and powerless. It was then that he fucked Albedo in front of him, and her eyes turned into hearts from the pleasure of it as she went on to state to the Overlord that Naruto was a better lover than he ever was. Once he was done and she was his concubine, Naruto had the Overlord dragged away to be placed within a special cell that would keep him in a form of stasis that would freeze them in time as long as they resided in the cell. They didn't age, nor did they grow tired or hungry. And he was not the only one to stay in these cells since Naruto always made sure that the leaders of the cities they invaded, along with their families. He made it a habit of his to force the leaders see their families raped in front of them by his brother Gara, who did so since he had gained trace amounts of Shikaku's insanity along with his own hatred. He took glee in fucking the wives and daughters of the leaders, and would end it by using his power to fill them full of sand and tear them up from the inside out while their sons were devoured alive by his night wolves. Sure, by doing so he was killing off a precious commodity since the women died without giving birth, but Naruto relished the fact that these men were forever in a state of a broken mind and misery. There were vampires within his ranks, and like with Centaurea, there was not much of a story about his concubine Mocha, since she was given to him when their race joined, but unlike Centaurea she didn't like it and had tried to fight it. Naruto had accepted her challenge with the agreement that she would pledge herself to him if she was defeated. She agreed to it, and showed off her true form in preparation of the fight. Yet no matter how hard she hit him, he was not hurt in any way. She hit him with blows that cracked the ground from the force alone, and yet he still stood with no visible damage on his body. In the end, he grew tired and simply slugged her across the face and won the fight. After she awoke, he took her to his bed, and even though she was a stubborn woman, she had enjoyed it thoroughly. The next race was the horsemen, who were basically reverse centaurs since they had the bodies of man and the heads of horse. But there were no females within their race to speak of. There were various insect creatures along with their leaders, the arachnid. The leader had offered up her daughter Arachnira, who just like the others who were offered up by their leaders with the exception of Mocha, graciously accepted the position as his concubine. There were werewolves as well, but all but one of them were male, and the female who was known as Froze became his concubine since she knew an alpha male when she saw one, and so she had pounced upon him during one of his many nightly walks. He had turned the table on her though by becoming the dominant one and took her in the alley, to which her eyes became glazed as he ravished her and then became his as he breed her right in that alley. The last of the species that resided within the newly formed Dark Kingdom, were the Lamia, who were hunted by the humans ferociously because of not only their beauty to be sold as sex slaves, but their scales as well since they were rare ingredients to obtain for potions and such. This was the only race that he took two concubines from since he couldn't decide upon their leader or her daughter, since both clearly lusted for him, and in a way they seemed the same age since Lamia aged slowly and a lot of the older ones still looked fairly young. Their names were Maya and Laya. She is not named in the manga so just went with this. And with that, his army as well as his harem was complete. He had spent the years crushing all the human cities that resided in the western lands, and just last year he had finished his goal. There were over 300 cities in the west, and now they were all under his control as his army expanded and took back the land. They did as the humans had before them and began to work the land so that they could raise their families in peace now that the enemy was no more, and all the while, Naruto soothed out all the hatred between the races under his command. It wasn't easy in the slightest, but he did what he had set out to do and unified the West as well as killed off the human presence. Now he was ready to take on the growing power of the East, who so many humans had tried to run towards to warn them of the coming darkness, but his night wolves made short work of them. And now he found himself in his bedchambers, his harem snuggling up next to him in various ways. He saw his queen Olga get up and head towards the baths, and so he decided to follow her since the sight of so many naked women in one's place made the lust within him reach higher levels, and he needed to take care of it if he was going to be able to concentrate on anything else. While he had screwed all of them plenty of times, they had not yet become pregnant since he was not ready to have kids just yet, not until humanity was gone, since they would find out about them somehow and try to take them for their own sick purposes. To be used and abused like they had done to him in his youth. But he pushed those thoughts out of his head as he made his way to the baths in his palace. He walked into the baths, which were large to accommodate many people at once, and within the water was Olga in all her naked glory. So, Naruto stepped into the bath as well and sat down in the rather comfortable water, and noticed two servants strip and step into the bath as well with some cleaning tools in their hands. "Wash his arms, I shall handle his chest," Olga orders the two girls as she sees her king sitting there. "Yes, my lady," they say in unison and lift up his arms, lathering them up with soap. Olga then sits on his lap, wrapping her legs around his waist, and rubs her hands over a bar of soap, and then over his chest. "Well, I wonder why you decided to follow me into the baths," she asks. Naruto let out a soft moan, and he became rock hard. His cock pokes her in the back and she giggles. "I'll take that as a hint you like this. Don't you?" He just nods as his response, since what sane man would hate such a thing? Then Olga pressed her breasts to his chest, and starts running them up and down, rubbing the soap across both of their bodies. The pleasure is almost too much, and he didn't know if he could hold himself back any longer. Unable to control his desires any longer, he freed his arms from the two servants, and wrapped them tightly around Olga, bringing her into a lust crazy kiss. She squeals at first, but her arms soon travel around him, and she returns his lust. He grabbed her by the ass and lifted her over his throbbing cock, before plunging her down on it. Crying out, she throws her head back, her tongue sticking out of her mouth. Naruto didn't give her a second's pause and started ramming his cock in her like a jackhammer. She let out a feral cry of ecstasy with each thrust, and soon her hips start moving on their own. Seeing her luscious bouncing breasts, he took them in his hands and started kneading them like dough. She moaned at his efforts, her golden eyes rolling back, as her tongue hangs lazily out of her mouth. Naruto then give her pink nipples a twist, and she screams in pleasure. "More! Give me more! Destroy me! Make me a slave to this pleasure," she cries out. To think that a dark elf queen who was a virgin before he showed up would turn into such a slutty woman. He was not complaining, he just didn't think it would go like this. But he wouldn't want it any other way. As he continued to pound away at her tight pussy, he felt two pairs of breasts press up to his back. He looked over his shoulder and sees the two servants rubbing their soap-soaked tits along his back, their faces red with passion. They seem to want to feel the same pleasure their queen is. So he decided to oblige them by creating two separate clones of himself, and each one took a servant and began to fuck their brains out to the point that they were now like Olga herself was. Naruto leaned in and gave Olga another sloppy kiss, licking the insides of her mouth, dominating her tongue with his own. He felt her pussy clench down hard on his cock, and he grunted as he neared an orgasm of his own. I'm about to come, Olga. Come inside me. Always inside me. Give me your child, she cries. With as much strength as he can easily muster, he thrust all the way inside her, and she screams as he filled her womb to burst with his seed. After the final squirt from his cock fills her womb, she falls limp against his chest. Heavy with breath. So, that's it for today. I hope you guys like it and enjoyed the story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe my channel for great stories like this. Thank you, see you soon in next video.